I'm going to be talking to Rob Gramlich, who's a president of consulting firm Grid Strategies, about a new report that his firm and Brattle Group have released called Transmission Planning for the 21st Century, Proven Practices that Increase Value and Reduce Costs. Why is this important? Because President Biden, the administration, has set a goal of a national emissions-free electricity system by 2035. It's very ambitious, and it has all sorts of consequences or implications for utilities and regulators. So I'm going to talk to Rob about that. Welcome to the interview, Rob.
Thanks, Markham. Great to be here.
Well, look, planning sounds really boring, but it's really central to how the United States is going to achieve that ambitious goal. What's wrong with the current planning process, and how might it be fixed?
Yeah, planning really is critical, especially when a critical piece of the puzzle is transmission that can take 10 years for specific lines. And we're going to need a lot of those lines, and we're going to need an integrated network that all fits together. The fitting together part also requires planning. So we really need to do a lot of proactive planning to figure out the efficient and reliable transmission network to support those goals and states' goals and whatever Congress comes up with here this fall, and just for resilience and reliability purposes, entirely separate from the clean energy objectives.
Now, a quick question for you around why the power grid is at the center of this, because I see it on social media all the time, that the future of electricity is distributed generation, rooftop solar, that sort of thing, and a lot of emphasis on microgrids and not so much on the bigger power grid. So why is it that we have to worry about, reforming the grid, modernizing the grid, and transmission?
Well, I'm sure there will be a lot of distributed energy, but that doesn't change the fact that if the wind's blowing in one place, it probably isn't 300 or 400 miles away, and vice versa. And you have solar in different time zones and with cloud cover and not. And really, all the studies and experiences from the US and around the world is that the way to make high renewable penetration grids work is you have to move a lot of power. You got to ship it across long distances. And that's also what we're finding for severe weather. So we're sort of living the climate crisis as we're planning to try to avoid the worst aspects of it in the future with these increasingly severe and frequent weather events. Any number of things can affect generation of all types in one region, and the best way, among many ways, to prevent the consequences of that is to, again, ship power from where it's plentiful to where it's needed.
Now, some of this planning is done by 11 planning authorities in the US. Can you explain what those planning authorities do?
Sure. I mean, these are really artifacts of relatively recent Federal Energy Regulatory Commission initiatives over the last 25 years to move the industry out of these sort of balkanized, just utility-only systems. We still have 330 transmission owners around the country that were part of vertically integrated monopolies, just where the business model was serve local generation with local load. And so FERC and various reliability authorities have been trying to expand the regionalization of the grid to share capacity for reliability incidents and for efficiency. And then with the advent of restructuring in markets 20 years ago, those regional markets became important. Some of those planning authorities are regional transmission organizations that also operate spot markets for electricity. But they all have responsibilities under FERC to plan the infrastructure. The problem is they're not really doing it. And so that was a major thrust of our report, that we need to be planning more, and yet we're doing barely any.
Now, one of the conclusions of your report was the current process is not very efficient and not very cost effective.
Right. The current process is hard to even call planning. Basically, what happens is if you're a new wind, solar storage, or other type of generator, you go to the transmission operator and and say, I'd like to interconnect, and you have some studies and they assign costs for what the network upgrades would be. And so it's really a reactive approach. The transmission owner or the regional transmission organization sort of takes them one by one, and you get in the queue and you get your costs. But we're not actually planning for anticipated future generations. So FERC started this process with a rulemaking proceeding where they noted that current planning does not incorporate anticipated future generation. And that's a fundamental flaw. There are a million details in that proceeding, but the one basic thing is that just the fact that our planning authorities are not actually planning. They're not even really taking into account the future generation mix. And so that's a fundamental problem, and it needs to be fixed. And FERC has initiated this process to fix it.
Now, your report also came to the conclusion that the key to achieving the emission goals and keeping total electricity costs reasonable is well-planned transmission. Can you explain that?
Sure. So the first step is what we've been talking about, is just put the anticipated future generation in there. Everybody's familiar with electricity system planning and how it has a load forecast, right? You say, okay, well, 10, 15 years from now, here's what we expect the load to be. And, you can battle about with the estimates, but it's widely accepted that that's a feature of that plan. Well, it should be just as uncontroversial that there should be a generation forecast. We should put anticipated future generation in there. So that's the first step. The second step is to put all of the values of transmission together. So multi-benefit planning. There's reliability, resilience. Well-planned transmission can reduce the cost of generation because you can share reserves. You basically need less generation capacity around the region. There's production cost savings and other benefits. So you put all that multi-benefit in there together, and then you do some scenario planning. Some of the best examples, and we've had some good examples of this type of planning around the country, have looked at a variety of future states, like with different severe weather scenarios and things like that, and load and generation scenarios, and found that there's a set of lines that would be very valuable in a variety of those future states. And so that leads you to sort of a least regrets type of transmission plan, where you don't really know the future, but if the future turns out to look like scenario A, B, C, or D, you still would like to have these lines. So great. So that tells you, let's build those lines. So that's the type of planning that we're looking for. The other, I guess, two other aspects real quick is planning two regions together, jointly planning. We tend to do it a little bit siloed right now. And then finally doing a comprehensive network solution as opposed to line by line. It's a lot more efficient if you put a network together, and sometimes sometimes there are some expensive lines that you don't actually need if you do like the whole comprehensive plan across the region together, and you can find the right mix of technology, whether that's some HVDC, which is increasingly coming into these plans, direct current as opposed to AC, alternating current, and then also grid enhancing technologies, or some of these technologies that can deliver more over existing lines. So, finding the right technological package of solutions in a comprehensive way is a lot more efficient than a line by line reactive analysis like we do it today.
Now, Rob, final question. There's been a lot of talk, or I should say some talk, but increasingly more discussion in Canada around the integration of the Canadian and US electricity systems. So if you're talking about improved planning, is the integration between or increased integration between the two countries, should that be on the agenda?
I think so, yes. From a physics and economic perspective, there's a lot of value in integrating neighboring power systems, and there's an especially great deal of value with the hydro resource and reservoirs that Canada has. I mean, there are terawatt hours of storage. We always talk about how what we really need is long duration storage here in the US, or for any system trying to integrate high renewable energy penetration. Well, they've got it. They've got massive amounts of it that could last months if the systems were well enough interconnected. They are connected to some extent today, but there's more there that we could benefit from.
So if I understand you correctly, the fact that, there are at least 3 provinces with major hydroelectric production or generation, BC, Manitoba, and Quebec. Manitoba and Quebec in particular still have a lot of potential to increase hydroelectric generation. And the value of that electricity, if I understand this correctly, is higher when you include the value of storage than it is just on a kilowatt hour basis if it's sold to a customer.
Absolutely. We need to be planning in a much more sophisticated way to take into account the time and place of the energy. We're going to have plentiful supplies of energy at certain times and places with rapid growth of wind and solar. But it's the shoulder periods, and it's the evenings, and it's different times of year. There can be winter peaking, and sort of these extended cold spells are really hard to cover. And you really need to plan much more carefully to fit a very complicated puzzle together of all the resources needed at different times and places.
Right, Rob, thank you very much. Really appreciate your insights on this.
All right, Markham, good to be with you.